Before empires, before kings and gods, there was silence. The kind of silence that only the untouched earth knows. No writing, no cities, no armies, only the sound of wind over empty plains and the quiet rhythm of survival. But then, something stirred. In the valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates, humanity woke up. These early people, your ancestors, stopped running. They bent the wild grasses to their will. They learned to plant, to wait, to harvest. And with that first act of patience, civilization was born. But this wasn't just about farming. It was about memory, about staying in one place long enough to build stories into the land. People began building homes from mud brick. They learned to store grain, to tame animals, to plan for the future. In a world where survival used to mean constant movement, now it meant learning how to stay. This was the Neolithic Revolution, and it changed everything. Jericho, Çatalhöyük. These early cities began to rise from the soil. But in the land between rivers, Mesopotamia, a deeper magic was at work. Something was about to happen that the world had never seen before. The first great cities of history were preparing to rise. At the southern edge of Mesopotamia, where the land was cracked, the air dry, and the rivers moody, something impossible happened. Humans stopped wandering. They built. They settled. They invented cities. This was Sumer, the world's first civilization. Sumer was not a single city, but a collection of fiercely independent city-states. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Eridu, and more. Each had its own ruler, its own gods, its own walls. But one city, Uruk, towered above them all. Uruk wasn't just a city, it was the city. By 3000 BC, over 50,000 people lived here, making it the largest urban center in the world. Its ziggurat, a temple that seemed to scrape the sky, honored Inanna, the goddess of love and war. But what truly made Sumer different was writing. They didn't just build cities, they built memory. On small wet tablets of clay, Sumerians etched a language with wedge-shaped marks. This was cuneiform, the oldest written language we've ever found. At first, it was used to track grain, sheep, barley. But over time, it told stories, it recorded laws, it asked questions no human had ever asked before. In the heart of Sumer, power wasn't just about muscle or swords. Power was divine. Each king was chosen by the gods, or so they claimed. And from the temples came the priests, who interpreted omens, dreams, and even the stars. To protect their cities, Sumerians invented walls. To feed their people, they dug irrigation canals. To govern the growing population, they created laws. Long before Hammurabi, they even invented the calendar to predict floods. They tracked Venus, the morning star, and used her path to time rituals. But Sumer wasn't paradise. City-states warred over water. They fought for control. They enslaved one another. Still, despite the conflict, the ideas they created would ripple through time. The Sumerians are gone. Uruk is dust, but their questions still echo. What is justice? What makes a ruler divine? How do we remember who we are? Their clay tablets may have cracked, but their thoughts endure. Before Alexander, before Caesar, before even pharaohs ruled Egypt, there was Sargon, a man with no royal blood, no divine lineage, only fire in his heart, and a vision that would change the world. Legend says Sargon was born poor. His mother, a temple priestess, cast him adrift in a basket on the Euphrates River, just like Moses would be centuries later. Raised by humble hands, he rose from gardener to cupbearer to king. And when he seized power, he didn't stop. He marched across Sumer, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, all fell before him. For the first time in human history, one man ruled all of Mesopotamia. This was the birth of the Akkadian Empire, the first empire the world had ever seen. But Sargon didn't just conquer with the sword, he united the people with language. Cuneiform was adapted to write a new tongue, Akkadian, a Semitic language that would become the region's official voice for centuries. Sargon's rule wasn't just about control, it was about order. He built roads that linked cities like veins in a living body. He posted governors, he made law, and wherever his armies marched, they carried culture. But empires are not made of stone, they're made of people. And people carry ambition, jealousy, fear. After Sargon's death, his grandson Naram-Sin claimed to be a living god. He crushed rebellions, built monuments, but his arrogance angered the heavens. Then came the drought, the famine, the invasions from the Gutians, barbaric mountain tribes who brought ruin. The great Akkadian Empire collapsed, swallowed by the same sands it once ruled. But the idea of empire never died. From the ruins of Akkad, others would rise, others would learn what it meant to rule not just land, but people. The world had seen kingdoms, but now it had seen an empire. The Akkadians taught humanity one powerful truth: that ideas, not just armies, can bind people together, and that even a nobody can change the course of time. The empire of Sargon had collapsed. The land lay shattered. Cities that once buzzed with scribes and soldiers now echoed with silence. Chaos ruled, and yet, from the dust of forgotten gods, a new power would rise. Narrator. They called him Ur-Nammu, a king from the city of Ur, an ancient Sumerian city once eclipsed by Akkadian power. But Ur-Nammu was a builder, not just of cities, but of hope. He didn't just want to rule, he wanted to restore the spirit of Sumer. He rebuilt the city of Ur. He ordered the construction of the great ziggurat, a towering temple reaching for the heavens. But Ur-Nammu's genius wasn't only in architecture. He gave the people something even more powerful: law. Before Hammurabi, before Roman codes, there was the Code of Ur-Nammu, the oldest written law code in human history. Ur-Nammu's laws protected the weak. They fined crimes instead of cutting off hands. They spoke not of cruelty, but order. For a brief moment, it felt like Eden had returned to the land of rivers. His son, Shulgi, continued the dream. He called himself a god, yes. But he also ran marathons between cities, wrote poetry, and expanded the empire to its greatest size. This Neo-Sumerian empire wasn't just power, it was a renaissance. Literature flourished, hymns were composed, myths were reborn. The gods returned to their altars. But empires, like stars, burn bright and burn out. After Shulgi, the rulers weakened. Invaders from Elam crept in. The once great Sumerian cities were looted. Temples burned. By 2004 BC, the Neo-Sumerian dream had ended. But what they left behind endures. The ziggurat still stands. 4,000 years later, the laws still speak, etched in clay. The myths they revived. They whisper in every story that followed. Sumer had fallen, risen, and fallen again. But its flame, its soul, was impossible to erase. Ur-Nammu proved that even in the darkest ruins, a civilization can rise again. A world before writing, a world where stories, laws, and history lived only in the memory of people, passed down by word of mouth, fragile and fleeting. Then, over 5,000 years ago, somewhere along the winding banks of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, something extraordinary happened. A quiet revolution began, the birth of writing itself. And it was called cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script that would change everything. Cuneiform wasn't just writing, it was magic captured in clay. Those tiny wedge shapes, etched into wet tablets, were the keys to unlocking human memory, giving voice to thoughts, laws, and dreams across millennia. But how did this strange script come to be? At first, it was simple, just marks to count crops, trade goods, and livestock. Merchants and farmers needed a way to keep track, to protect their wealth. Numbers became symbols. Symbols became words. Yet, cuneiform quickly blossomed into something far richer, a language for stories, prayers, laws, and even poetry. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories known to humanity, was written in cuneiform, forever preserving tales of heroes, gods, and mortality. But here's the haunting part. For thousands of years, cuneiform was lost, forgotten like a secret buried under layers of time and sand. For centuries, no one could read the mysterious wedge marks. The knowledge vanished until the 19th century, when a group of passionate explorers and scholars cracked the code. The decipherment of cuneiform was like opening a time capsule. Suddenly, voices from the distant past spoke again. We heard the whispers of kings and commoners alike. Their laws, their contracts, their fears, and their hopes came alive. Cuneiform's legacy? It's the mother of all writing systems, the foundation of human civilization's ability to record knowledge, culture, and power. Without it, history as we know it would be silent. But let's pause and wonder, how did the simple act of pressing a stylus into clay ignite a chain reaction that led to everything we know today? That small wedge-shaped mark connects us directly to the very dawn of human thought. So, the next time you write a message, send an email, or type a tweet, remember the ancient scribes and their quiet, powerful invention. They gave humanity a voice that echoes through time. Cuneiform was more than just writing. It was the first step toward everything that makes us human: language, law, art, and memory. The story of civilization, written in wedges and clay, still shapes our world today. As the last embers of the Neo-Sumerian Empire faded into the dust, a new city began to stir. Nestled along the Euphrates wasn't the biggest, it wasn't the oldest, but it would become the most famous. They called it Babylon. At first, Babylon was just another small kingdom. But then came Hammurabi, a king with the mind of a conqueror and the soul of a judge. He would unite Mesopotamia like none before, not with brute strength alone, but with law. Under Hammurabi, Babylon became a city of innovation, a place of justice, of balance, of glory. And at its center stood a towering structure that scraped the sky, the Anunnaki, the ziggurat that may have inspired the legend of the Tower of Babel. But it was Hammurabi's code that changed the world. Over 280 laws, carved into black stone, not whispered by priests, not kept in palaces, but displayed for everyone to see. This wasn't just law, it was revolution. It set wages, protected women, guarded the weak. It even held the king accountable. It said, "If a ruler is unjust, let him be judged." Who else had dared write such a thing? Was Babylon perfect? Slavery still existed. Punishments were harsh. But in a world ruled by might, Babylon offered order. And in a time of fear, it offered structure. And yet, empires rise, and empires fall. After Hammurabi, Babylon weakened. Enemies pressed in. By 1595 BC, the Hittites stormed the gates. The city fell, its treasures plundered. But Babylon wouldn't stay dead for long. Because Babylon wasn't just a city, it was an idea, a symbol, of law, of wisdom, of wonder. and it would return stronger than ever. Fall of Babylon to the Hittites, 1595 BC. Hammurabi's stone still stands 3,700 years later, not just as a relic, but as a foundation. Because when Babylon rose, humanity discovered something deeper than power. It discovered law. Babylon had fallen, its temples burned, its towers shattered, its pride broken. But then came strangers. From the Zagros Mountains they descended quietly. They didn't speak Akkadian. They didn't come with fire. They came to build. They were the Kassites. And here's the twist. They didn't destroy Babylon. They restored it. For nearly 400 years, the Kassites ruled the city they did not build. They made it stronger, not through empire, but through stability. Under Kassite rule, Babylon became sacred. It was no longer just a capital, it was the center of the universe. They revived festivals like the Akitu New Year, restored ancient Sumerian texts, and honored the gods of the past. And still the world around them burned. While Babylon found peace, other powers rose and fell like waves. The Elamites in the east, the Hittites in Anatolia, the Egyptians, mighty and watching, the Mitanni in the north, and soon the Assyrians would awaken. The Kassites weren't great conquerors, but they were great keepers of knowledge, of peace, of Babylon's soul. But time never stays kind. By 1155 BC, Elamite invaders from the east sacked Babylon again. They looted its treasures, stole its sacred statues, even kidnapped the god Marduk himself. It was humiliation on a cosmic. The Kassites were overthrown, and Babylon wounded again. But did it end there? Mesopotamia was not done. It was about to enter one of its most ruthless, terrifying, and brilliant eras yet. The rise of Assyria was coming. They weren't the loudest or the strongest, but the Kassites held the torch when everyone else was reaching for a sword. And because of them, Babylon lived. If Babylon was a city of priests and poets, Assyria was a nation of warriors. For centuries, they waited in the shadows, in the windswept plains of northern Mesopotamia, watching, learning, sharpening steel. Then, like thunder over the Tigris, hay struck. By 900 BC, they became unstoppable. They didn't just fight wars, they perfected them. Siege towers, battering rams, psychological terror. They turned conquest into an art and a message. Submit or vanish. But here's the truth that hurts. The Assyrians were not mindless brutes. They were architects, scholars, astrologers. They built libraries, mapped stars, wrote medical texts that still baffle scientists today. And their kings? Terrifying, brilliant, and divine. Tiglath-Pileser, Ashur-Nasirpal, Sargon II, Sennacherib, and Ashurbanipal, each more ruthless than the last. They carved their victories into stone. Palace walls became billboards of fear. Lion hunts, skinned enemies, cities on fire. In 701 BC, Sennacherib marched on Jerusalem. He bragged of trapping its king like a bird in a cage. And when Babylon rebelled, he didn't just punish it, he leveled it, destroyed temples, tore down its ziggurats, and drained its canals. But Babylon always comes back. Sennacherib's own son, Esarhaddon, rebuilt the city his father destroyed. He knew you can conquer Babylon, but you must also worship it. Assyria reached its peak under Ashurbanipal, king, scholar, hunter of lions. He created the Library of Nineveh, the greatest archive in the ancient world. Over 30,000 tablets, from medicine to magic, myths to mathematics. It's because of him we still read the Epic of Gilgamesh today. But no empire is invincible. The Assyrians ruled through fear, and fear has a cost. By 627 BC, internal revolts shook them, enemies united. Babylon, again, was at the heart of resistance. In 612 BC, Nineveh, their capital, was wiped from the earth. The Assyrians built their empire on fear. They rose like fire and burned out like one, but their shadow still walks the ruins. The empire that rose from ashes. From the ashes of Assyria, a phoenix took flight. It was Babylon again, but not the wounded Babylon of the past. This was a new power, a cultural revival, a declaration to the world. You tried to erase us, but we were written in stone. The man behind this resurrection? Nabopolassar, a Chaldean rebel who defied Assyria and claimed Babylon for himself. But it was his son who changed the world, a name that echoed across empires: Nebuchadnezzar II. Nebuchadnezzar ruled for over 40 years, and what he built was nothing short of mythical. The Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, towering ziggurats, the Ishtar Gate, a wall of blue, gold, and majesty. Babylon became not just a city, but a statement. This is the center of the world. And while the streets were paved in power, the skies were charted with stars. Babylonian scholars studied the heavens, creating some of the world's first astronomy tables. They tracked planets, predicted eclipses, mapped the movement of Venus. They weren't just watching the sky. They were decoding the language of the gods. But power brings enemies. And Babylon's pride was also its vulnerability. Nebuchadnezzar died in 562 BC, and with him the golden flame began to flicker. His successors were weak. Corruption grew, religious tensions flared, and far to the east, a new storm was brewing. In 539 BC, Cyrus the Great of Persia arrived, but not with destruction, with strategy. He entered Babylon without a battle. The gates opened peacefully. The priests were paid. The people welcomed him. Why? Because even the greatest city will bow to a leader who understands its soul. Fall to Persia under Cyrus the Great without bloodshed. The Neo-Babylonian Empire didn't just revive a city. It resurrected a civilization. For a moment, the heart of the ancient world beat loud and proud, until it bowed, not in defeat, but in elegance. The empire that conquered without war. 539 BC. A date carved into the soul of civilization. From the east, under a sky of fate, marched a king unlike any before. Not a destroyer, not a tyrant, but a visionary. Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Babylon, the jewel of Mesopotamia, was weary. Its kings had grown corrupt. Its priests disillusioned its people, tired of fear. Cyrus didn't need an army of swords. He brought an army of ideas. In one of history's most astonishing moments, Babylon surrendered without a fight. The Euphrates River was diverted, and the Persian army walked straight into the city, at night, without bloodshed. But the real genius wasn't in how Cyrus entered. It was in how he ruled. Cyrus didn't burn temples. He restored them. He didn't enslave people. He freed them. In fact, his declaration, the Cyrus Cylinder, is often called the first human rights charter. He respected Babylonian gods, laws, and culture, not because he feared them, but because he honored the roots of civilization. Cyrus understood something most kings never do. Empires are not built with bricks and fear. They are built with respect. He unified the ancient world, from the Indus River to the Mediterranean. And Babylon, once the center of its own empire, became a jewel in a new crown. The Persian conquest wasn't the end of Babylon. It was a new beginning, a chapter of peace, inclusion, and vision. But no empire lasts forever. The twilight was coming, and with it, the final echo of Mesopotamia. The mighty rivers of Mesopotamia, once the lifeblood of a civilization that dazzled the ancient world, now flowed quietly past ruins that whispered stories of glory and heartbreak. By 539 BC, the twilight of Mesopotamia had begun. Not with a sudden fall, but a slow fading like the last embers of a dying fire. This was a land that had given birth to writing, law, and cities. Yet now it stood vulnerable, caught between the tides of new empires, new religions, and sweeping change. The Persian conqueror, Cyrus the Great, strode into Babylon, not with the fury of a destroyer, but with the wisdom of a ruler who understood that to control history, one must honor the past. His conquest was a turning point, but it was also a fragile pause before the next wave of transformation. But what did this twilight mean for the people? For the farmers, priests, merchants, and children who had once called this cradle of civilization home? Life continued, but the old gods grew silent. Temples lost their grandeur, and the echoes of prayers faded into the desert winds. Then came the Greeks under Alexander the Great, bringing new ideas, gods, and rulers. Yet Mesopotamia was no longer the heart of the world. It was a fading star. Christianity spread slowly, reshaping beliefs and communities. The ancient myths of Gilgamesh gave way to new stories of faith and salvation. Even as empires rose and fell, the Parthians, Romans, and eventually the Sassanids, Mesopotamia's spirit endured, hidden beneath layers of conquest and change. But this twilight wasn't just an ending, it was a transformation. The legacy of Mesopotamia, encoded in law, language, and thought, traveled far beyond these rivers. In the quiet dusk, Mesopotamia whispered its final lesson, that no empire, no civilization truly dies. It becomes part of the endless story of humanity, shaping who we are even when forgotten. So, as we look back on these ruins, let us remember, the twilight of Mesopotamia was not a loss, but a beginning. For every sunset signals the promise of a new dawn. If this video made you think, if it lit a fire in your heart the way it did in mine, don't just scroll. Subscribe, because this journey, we're just getting started. Visual prompt. Slow zoom out of you looking up at stars/book/map. Cinematic lighting.